Hi, good evening, everybody. Fellow honorary rangers from across the globe. So our presenters tonight is husband and wife team, Beverley Moll and Michiel Moll, and also Rina Steyn. They were the authors of the book, The Heart and Soul of the Tankwa Karoo National Park. I can clearly recall it was about 10 years ago when the park manager at Tankwa Karoo National Park, Conrad Strauss, approached the Boland region of the Sandparks Honorary Rangers to research and document the history of the Tankwa Karoo National Park and its environs. At that stage, there were no better people to take up this task than the three presenters and the three authors that we are going to meet later tonight. Immediately after the challenge came out, Beverley, Rina, and Michiel took up the challenge, and for the next 10 years, they have delved into the history and lifestyle of those who lived in that area. In this process, much information about the park has also been gathered, and the result is a beautiful 160-page A4-size book called The Heart and Soul of the Tankwa Karoo National Park. So this talk not only introduces the actual park and its history, but it will also share some of the stories that have come out of the area, all of which can be found in this book as well. I would like to say something about the three presenters. I don't know, Mike, if I should call you guys presenters or authors, because in true sense, you are the authors of the book, and you guys are going to present it to us tonight. But the three authors come from a very diverse yet similar background. All three having been involved in education. Beverley with a master's degree in music. She was a music teacher at La Rochelle High School in Paarl, and she was also an examiner for both the Cape Department of Education and UNISA. Rina Steyn holds a doctorate in drama education. So if you look for a doctor drama queen, then Rina is your girl. She holds a doctorate in drama education and was a senior lecturer at Paarl College of Education and at the Boland College of Education in Wellington. Mike, as we know him, Michiel Moll, holds a doctorate in education. He was a teacher, librarian, a senior lecturer at Boland College of Education, and he retired as the Deputy Director of Libraries at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Beverley, Rina, and Michiel have been honorary rangers for the last 15 years. They started off with Boland region, way back when Boland region was actually established. And in the last 5 years after retirement, they are with the West Coast region at the moment. This is not the first book that they've published, you know, because the park was quite keen to get something published. Their first publication was a 16-page A5 publication called Around the Tankwa Karoo National Park, a history of some of the buildings and the people that lived in them. And that booklet was published and is still available in the park today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the three authors, Beverley Moll, Michiel Moll, and Rina Steyn. Welcome to you guys, and thank you very much for giving up your time to share your journey with us. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Willie. Before we start, I'd just like to indicate that we are from Veldrif, which means that our bandwidth is poor, so I will have this video on for a minute so that everybody can see what we look like. Run away in fright and terror if you want to. And then we will be switching the video off and going back to that lovely photo, which you should soon recognize. So obviously I am Mike, and I'm now swiveling towards Rina.
Hi.
And to Beverley.
Hello.
So having seen the three of us, I will now move to screen sharing. Right. So Willie has already mentioned that we are the authors of the book. This is the cover of the book, the heart and soul of the Tankwa Karoo National Park. And we are known colloquially as the Tankwa Trio. This is the book that has taken us 10 years of backwards and forwards and up and down, and we'll share a little bit of that with you. And you are also seeing this thanks to Boland's support for the publication of the book and getting it out onto the shelf. The book would also not be what it is without the support we had from Blueprint Tourism with Steve and Debbie Newbold, who took a lot of the photos and in fact actually even went to Tankwa to help sort it. And they were the other side of the 7 sets of proofs that we went through in order to get to this final product. Most of the slides you are seeing tonight actually come from the book itself. But I'm sure the first question you're going to ask is, where is the Tankwa? So this is the Tankwa Karoo National Park location. You can see it's pretty close to where we are now, in fact, hidden here behind the blue block, sitting in Veldrif. But the key feature for the Tankwa is, how do you get there? Well, one of the certainties that you will have to get there is a pass. Whether you come from the south, coming from Ceres, down here, along the R355, you'll be going through the Toronsberg Pass. If you come from Calvinia up north here and you come down on the R355, you're going to come through the Blowkrans Pass. If you decide to skip all of that and go to the metropolis of Middelpos, here on the side, you will see that you will be needing to come down Ghanega Pass. For those of you who like things cold and starry, Sutherland is another place that you can come through. And then you have a choice of the Karoo Road or the Oberg Pass. The Karoo Pass is also one of the most spectacular ones. Final sort of hiding place to come through would be to go from Ceres towards Citrusdal to a place called Optieberg. And there is a crossroad containing 2 of the best birding roads in South Africa, Skitterykloof and Katbakkies. And as the name implies, these are also 2 passes. The thing to remember is that Ceres, Calvinia, Citrusdal, Sutherland, Middelpos, the only places to get petrol. In fact, the R355 is the longest provincial road without petrol in the country, so please remember to fill up, otherwise you might have a bit of a problem. However, there are 2 great things to pass on the way. At the top of Ghanega Pass, you will find Ghanega Lodge. Possibly not best to spend too much time in the bar before driving down the pass, but hey, it's a wonderful place to visit and great people. Coming up from Ceres, you're going to be passing the Tankwa Padstal, the Tankwa Farm Stall. This is a place that is a must stop on anybody's visit. They are busy with some exciting projects now, building strange things in the desert. However, there are wild animals to look out for on these roads. These wild animals you will not find in Maybelle's or Stewart's Guide to Mammals, because these are known as the road crocodiles. Tankwa is notorious for chewing up tires. You have to learn how to drive carefully in the park. Fortunately, the one thing that Roodewerf office is capable of doing is repairing your tires. We do say to people who go there, it's best to make certain that you have 2 spare tires. So that is where to find the Tankwa Karoo National Park.
We found the wide open spaces, the ruins, and a sense of the past, inviting us to finding out more about this area. And this is the why. And we did it with the hope that we could preserve some of the history before it melted away like some of the mud buildings seen in the park. We were asked by the park manager, Conrad Strauss, at the time, to document the social history. With this book, we also wish to acknowledge the original inhabitants, the explorers, the pioneers, and the farming community of the Tankwa.
And then we decided to dedicate the book to our fathers who came before us and understood this beautiful country of ours.
As you have already heard, this was where it started, a small beginning. The 16-page A5 side around the Tankwa Karoo National Park, a guide to some of the buildings and people who lived in them. This was the original book. This book was followed, and Willy's being very modest on this, by the book on the geology of the Tankwa, also called Around the Tankwa Karoo National Park, a guide to some of the geology of the area, and you'll find that book also at reception. And frankly, you'll start finding more books because the Boland region is serious about supporting this park in a wider range of interpretation material.
From the beginning, it was decided to keep the text English, although most of the interviews were in Afrikaans.
Afrikaans words are in italics with an English translation in brackets when used for the first time.
So, having done the shorter brochure, foolishly, we stepped out thinking this was going to be quite easy. Something with a little bit more detail. Little did we know about the long and the winding road ahead. This is the Oberg Pass into Tankwa, and frankly, the Oberg Pass is a lot easier road than the one that we followed. In 10 years, we have gathered 5,777 electronic documents on the Tankwa, not to mention several shelves of books. We have spent countless hours on the book. Some of these hours were more productive than others. Even what was going to be in the book. We had many debates, endless sessions about what to include and what to leave out. What were we going to cover? And the more we dug into the Tankwa, the more information came out, the more we realized there's a rich tapestry of life that is portrayed in the buildings and in the other relics around the park. One thing though, this road might have been long and winding, but it had many highlights, and talking to the people from the area was one of the highlights.
Arie Shepherd from Sutherland is a great-grandchild of Oma Henny Shepherd. His grandparents on his mother's side also lived in the Langkloof. He told us the following story that his mother told him. Your father fought in Italy during World War II and sent most of his pay to me. I went to live with my parents and had to fetch the money at the post office at Roodewerf. Afterwards, I would go to the shop at Mansdam to buy what was necessary on the farm. One day, I saw the most beautiful framed mirror, but did not have enough money to buy it. It was fine. Every month, the mirror was still there. Finally, I had enough money to buy it. It was covered in a cloth and placed under the seat of the donkey cart. Your oldest brother, still a little boy, was with me. All went well until the donkey got spooked and swerved from the road near the farmhouse, and one of the wheels hit a large stone. I was sure that the cart was going to overturn. What should I save? The child or the mirror? The child? No, the mirror. The child. The mirror. Child. Mirror. Oh, Somehow, I managed to grab both, and all three stayed on the cart. I could not tell your grandfather, because he would not allow me to use the cart again. But I think he suspected me when he saw the wheel marks a day or two later.
So to find out what happened, we had to decide how would we go about investigating the Tankwa? How would we get into the background behind what was going on and what went on in the park? This park is a lot more than only space, plants, and animals. But even those two required a much closer look. We needed to find out how people lived there, how they farmed there, who was responsible, and some of the stories behind the relics, the artifacts, and the ruins that litter the park. This old wagon, and if you look to the left over the horizon, the old steam engine, which are at the Tankwa guest house, are typical examples of the artifacts that raise these questions in our minds.
We had two main sources of information, of which interviews were the most labor intensive. The names of the people we interviewed are listed at the back of the book. Quite a number of names. If you look on the right, this did not only involve writing to people, but also visits, many cups of coffee, hours of conversation, many trips to the Tankwa and trips through the Great Karoo. Initially, we spent many hours with Oom Conrad Strauss and his wife Marita, the parents of Conrad, who was the first park manager of the Tankwa National Park, Karoo National Park.
On one of our trips, we started our interviews in Laingsburg with Oom Piet Conradie and his wife, and then on to Beaufort West, where we visited Wessel Hanekom, who used to farm on Platfontein, and his wife Maria, who was a teacher at Skooltjie not far from Platfontein. On that trip, we also visited Willie Pitts, among others. I also made a trip to Ceres, where I visited the old age home and spoke to some of the widows of Tankwa farmers. Then I went to Sutherland to interview Ari Shepherd, who took me to the church office, where I photographed the inscription in the church register of the marriage of Richard Shepherd and Janetta Lombard. He could only speak English, and she only Afrikaans.
Our second main source of information was written. This included many published sources, but also many theses and many visits to the Cape Archives to consult old documents and letters. Some of these we have included in the book as they were written, but we have given English translations. Although the list of publications on the Tankwa Karoo and the park area more specifically is fairly limited, there were many other sources that could be consulted on different aspects. Books on plants, like Helga van Merwe's Wildflowers of the Roggeveld and Manning's Guide to Fynbos. Books on roads, like Mossop's Old Cape Highways. Background reading about early visitors ranging from Gudea Molsbergen's book to the Scher family of Middelpos. Exhaustive lists of resources and sources are available in the book.
We pieced together the movement of people through the Tankwa Basin. At the top left, Varsfontein was one of the original outspans for travelers and trekboere. The person in charge of the outspan, he was employed by the government and paid an annual salary. At one stage, there was a letter sent to the magistrate to complain that the fountain was not clean and dirty. The owner or the manager of the outspan had to make sure that travelers and their animals moved on within a day. The ruins, top right, the ruins of the double oven, inside and outside oven, are from the kitchen at Ricard's huis, in the Longkloof, at the Longkloof homestead, and it caters for both summer and winter baking. You can imagine that in the summer, you would not want to be inside a kitchen. You will bake from the outside. Richard Shepherd, otherwise known as Richard Engelsman or Englishman, was the first Ricket of the Longkloof. He married, as Rina had said, a local lass, Janetta Lombard, and he settled down to farm in the Longkloof. The bottom right, Polshoek, is a farmhouse. This was one of the first restorations by Sandparks for accommodation. This humble abode with a kitchen and 2 rooms leading off from the kitchen explains the simple lifestyle of the people farming in the Tankwa.
Ingela Augustine from Paperse Boom gave us a recipe, you will see it on the screen, for honey beer and bread. And that was enjoyed at many a dinner and dance held at Ricket's house in the Longkloof. Dances in the single garage were close-knit affairs and led to many courtships.
So that is a typical example of some of the kinds of information that are in the book, and we will be going through a bit more and embellishing our story. But what we want to clearly state at this stage is that this is not a guide to the park. It's not an official park guide. It doesn't have everything that we could find about the park. I'm afraid that would be many more volumes. However, what it does do is it gives you a chance to experience the past of what you're looking at. Experience how the people themselves felt. In the first section, we've got the indication of how landscape objects came to be. And in the second section, a lot more about life in the land. And in between all of this, you'll find stories, anecdotes, illustrations. And we hope that by using the book, dipping into it, looking at all the different bits, you'll come to a closer understanding of how life was lived in this part of South Africa, which is really a beautiful part of the country, part close to our heart, the part known as the Tankwa Karoo.
The first section, Getting Around the Tankwa, covers the places with interesting information. And so we've learnt about the Forgotten Highway, the great road to the north, to Kimberley and Johannesburg, where diamonds and gold were. This road from Ceres over the Transberg Pass follows the base of the Rochveld Mountains and the outspans and then moves up to Sutherland or Calvinia. Many a fortune seeker traveled the Forgotten Highway.
In between these descriptions, you will find some inserts on animals, plants, birds, people, and nuggets of some unusual and interesting information. Good chance to read a small thing and a great idea to give it to the child in the car to read for a better understanding of some of the things you will come across.
The second section, Living in the Tankwa, gives us a glimpse into the life of the remote, arid, and quite frankly impoverished area. As an example of education, you can read the story of Skooltjie, a 2-man school on Aantjiesbos, desperately in need of restoration. Skooltjie was built by the government in the 1920s for the children in the district. Skooltjie, apart from being a school, Skooltjie was the gathering place for many an occasion in the district, from the visiting doctor coming to vaccinate the children to farmers' society meetings in the evenings.
Skooltjie had a hostel and children were weekly boarders. At the beginning of a new school year, 2 donkeys named Frankfurt and Donker from the Platfontein farm were inspanned and sent to collect children from far and wide for the important event of registering for school. How long the children remained at school was a different matter, because often the children would be fetched back to work on the farms.
The third section consists of various lists. You can use them as checklists, tick lists, lists to look things up. Part of our problem here was what to leave out, what not to list. And then the second problem was to actually find a list. We'd like to thank those people who gave us permission to use some of their information to create these lists. In here, you will see that the Tankwa might be remote, it might be arid. You might think there's not much going on, but there are many mammals, there are many birds. I don't want to say many plants because it's many, 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 many plants. They're reptiles, they're amphibians. But what is really exciting is that new plants, new reptiles, new amphibians, and even new mammals are found regularly to be in the park, to be added to these lists, and to be seen for the first time. Some of the plants are being described for the first time ever and are being added to our knowledge of what is going on in this remote area.
Apart from the specific chapters, amongst the many inserts, we find out about the people who lived in or visited the Tankwa. With more than 1,000 years of history, we had trouble trying to put the last 300 years of all the inhabitants and explorers' history together.
We know that the Khoi and San were living in the Tankwa long before the Trek Boer. The discovery of a buried skeleton who was named Madawas, meaning mother was here, in Paardekloof. Archaeological evidence suggests that Madawas and her family lived there between 1450 and 1620. She lived a healthy life with good nutrition, proving that the Tankwa may once have been very fertile in the past.
The Tankwa had a share of strange characters. The picture you see here is Volmoersfontein. Oom Willie Pitts Versaghi told the story of the three brothers who went by the surname of Ras. They lived on Volmoersfontein, which was very far from Calvinia and Ceres. They were used to living on their own and using folk remedies, boererate, for any ailments. Two of the brothers went by the name of Koos, Ou Koos and Jong Koos. Jong Koos was stung by a scorpion on a hot summer's evening, and as a boereraad, Ou Koos treated Jong Koos repeatedly with a tablespoon of petrol. Ou Koos had been stung by a scorpion in his younger days, and a dose of petrol had no side effects on him. When Oom Willie Pitts arrived for his customary visit on his way to Bessiesfontein, he found young Koos foaming at the mouth and refusing to take his dose of petrol. Ou Koos was wailing away and saying that the petrol of today was not the same as in the old days. Jong Koos was convinced that Ou Koos was trying to kill him. Ou Koos had confused petrol with paraffin. Oom Willie drove as fast as he could to Bessiesfontein and rang the telephone exchange, the party line, to call for a doctor from Calvinia, 75 kilometers away. Dr. de Swart, who knew the Tankwa, was away, and Dr. Lombard was on call. But Dr. Lombard did not know the Tankwa at all, and Oom Willie gave him instructions to pick up Oom Hansie Breinat in Calvinia as his guide and to drive like the devil to Volmoersfontein. They carried Jong Koos out as stiff as a broomstick and took him to hospital. When they left, Ou Koos said to Oom Willie, "Yes, and there they go, and he's been driven away, and what must I now do?" Jong Koos survived his ordeal and came back to live with Ou Koos at Volmoersfontein for quite a while, but one morning he just dropped dead on the werf of Volmoersfontein. Perhaps the petrol was still doing its work.
Yes, and alas, now even that telephone would not work. one of the things that the Boland region did fairly early on was remove a 25-kilometer long telephone row up into the Long Kloof. I think the people that most missed the telephone poles, besides the perching birds, were probably the farmers' wives. I'm sure that the party lines in those days were a hotbed of local information. Let's not call it gossip. That sounds just too nasty.
Being arid, water is key in the Tankwa. There are two main rivers in the park, the Renoster River, sourced from the Roggeveld at the top of the Long Kloof, and the Tankwa River, sourced from the Klein Roggeveld. Both these rivers flow into the Oudtshoornskraal Dam. This dam was the biggest privately owned dam in the Southern Hemisphere at one stage. It dried up last year with the drought, but thanks to good rain this winter, the dam is full again.
There are many fountains and springs in the park. The nomadic seasonal movements of the Khoi and San became known to the early trekboer, who gave these fountains names like Brambergfontein, Bissiesfontein, Volmoersfontein. The trekboere were quick to learn that water was a scarce commodity. Competition became fierce, and domestic animals had to travel vast distances to be watered.
With a scarcity of water, it's not surprising that the plant life in the Tankwa Karoo National Park is very specifically adapted to the arid region. This is the map of the habitat units, but one of the common features is that the vegetation, which is basically serisucculent Karoo, and the park and its area has been considered one of only 25 global biodiversity hotspots. And this is the only arid biodiversity hotspot in the world.
One of the key feature plants of the area is the Hoodia Gordoni, or the garp. The San knew the traditional properties of this plant. It was an appetite suppressant. Locals would peel the spiny stem and chew it. This became internationally popular, especially in America, and the Hoodia plant was being poached on a large scale. The park then started mapping the Hoodia plants in certain areas with GPS coordinates as a protection measure to prevent further poaching. Hoodia was only one of the many natural folk remedies that was used. There are uses, the other uses are covered in the section on folk, I'm getting confused. There are uses of folk medicine and inserts on plants in a section on folk medicine and inserts on plants. Early pioneers in the days of the Dutch East India Company always had a well-stocked medicine box known as a Hollandse huisapteek. They soon learned that herbs and plants were useful supplements together with brandy or witblits, mampoer. In fact, brandy often proved to be a cure-all for almost anything. One of the examples quoted in the book, if a snake bit you, the wound was treated with tobacco juice and the patient was given a bottle of brandy to drink.
There were other treatments. So, for example, in the Tankwa Karoo, they had a fabulous treatment for the Spanish flu, which those of you who would like to use nowadays to cure yourself can go ahead and try. What was this treatment? First of all, you caught one of the cats that was in your roof to keep the rats and the mice down. Secondly, you skinned the cat. And thirdly, you put the cat's skin on your chest. That was sure to either cure you or to kill you. We've mentioned the inserts and the boxes, and what we would like to point out is that in many of these, you will find not information, just the information about the bird, the plant, or the animal, but how they fitted in the cultural milieu of the Tankwa. What were they used for? Were they cooked? Were they eaten? Were they poisonous? So take a look and learn from that as well. How do you know where to find them? Well, if you remember the page with the lists, in the bird list and the mammal list, there are page numbers indicating where inserts on those mammals or birds or snakes are. The plants are mentioned so often throughout the text and in so many places that there is a separate list of all the plants mentioned in the text and the pages they appear on. One of the key features of the plants are the names. We are all aware that plants have a scientific name, but in the area, very few people would have known the scientific names. They use a colloquial name, and that colloquial name was more often than not in Afrikaans, but occasionally also in the original Khoi language. Tankwa was a hard place to live. It was arid, it was dry, but there were also celebrations, times of joy. We've heard about the dances in the Langkloof and how they enjoyed themselves there. But in what was probably a very difficult period, which was the Anglo-Boer War, we also find some interesting stories. What you're seeing here is the monument to the British soldiers killed in the Battle of Middelpos, the main battle of the area. But it wasn't the only battle. There were raids up and down. There were commandos coming in, commandos going out. There were generals coming in and generals going out. Jan Smuts was in charge of the area for quite a while towards the end of the war. And a little known fact to most people was that Van Reinsdorp became part of the Orange Free State for a short while in the Boer War. It was annexed to the Boer Republic. But during this war period, there were also times that people had to rest up, times that people went for a break. And Christmas was one of those important times. Everybody celebrates Christmas. And even in the Boer War, they decided to celebrate Christmas. And one of the Boer commandos was lying up out in the veld on one of the friendly farms. And a couple of the men got together and decided that their commandant was a great chap. Man, he was such a great chap, he needed a special Christmas present. And the Christmas present they decided on was a white horse. Of course, the question was, where do you get a white horse? And the answer came to them, we're going to Williston. Now, there were only 4 of them. And that was 4 people to occupy a whole town. So they had to be very canny. They went off towards Williston, and in the morning, very early, sort of about just after sunrise, 2 of them entered and surprised the Cape Mounted Rifles in their bungalows. One can literally say they caught them with their pants down. They allowed them to put their pants on, but they took them all to the town jail and locked up the Cape Mounted Rifles detachment, all in jail, and went off to the pub. Once they were in the pub, their 4th person had commandeered a wagon and a couple of horses, and they loaded it up with all the necessary spirits that would keep them happy through Christmas and probably New Year as well. However, they felt bad. They really felt bad. The poor Cape Mounted Rifles hadn't done anything to them. So they decided they'd go and fetch them, bring them to the pub, and seeing that they couldn't cart all the liquor away, they would have a party. So a merry party was had by all in the pub. The Transvaalse Volkslied, national anthem, was sung loudly, to much cheering, even by the Cape Mounted Rifles. And off they went back to the camp, where the commandant at first was rather upset at them having broken the camp rules and having left camp. However, the presentation of the white horse really made up for it, and he forgave them after that. Don't think that this was a living horse. The white horse they were looking for was whiskey.
The park started with less than 40,000 hectares on the gravel plains of the basin. Currently, it is more than 160,000 hectares with plans for further expansion. The Tankwa has a unique layered description of South African history. The park has become a central part of life, and conservation is now the key driver of the area, supported by local and responsible tourism and Africa Burn. The Tankwa and the Cedarburg are linked in a mega conservation area of more than 260,000 hectares, known as the Greater Cedarburg Biodiversity Corridor.
This shows the latest accepted scientific classification of a cloud, the jet vapor trail as seen over Tankwa. Thus, while the park is steeped in the past, it also looks firmly to the future. Already in the southern part of the Tankwa, the first wind farms have been established. The Tankwa is also blessed with sunshine all year round, perfect for solar power.
So we are closing the back cover on this book. But not on Tankwa. In fact, in a couple of weeks' time, we will be camping again at Paardekloof.
We would really like to thank the Boland region for the work in making sure that this book reached the shelves. And we hope that you will all note the email, tankwabook@honoraryrangers.org. Please order your copy via this email.
And a final word of thanks to those who arranged this webinar and to all of you for attending.